Hiya, how you doing? Recently, I've had a few people ask me for suggestions of books I couldn't put down. And actually, I think this is quite a tall order for a novel because, a lot of books you might be reading, they might be great in some parts, but then other chapters or sections, your mind might start drifting a little bit. And so it's quite difficult to find a book that grips me all the way through. But each of these 10 book suggestions I have, they all gave me that feeling. I was staying up late at night, I was missing the bus and the train and the plane, and I was late for work because I had to know what happened next. And I was just completely gripped all the way through, and I think they're all amazing page turners. Now, I've made a video like this before, but I thought it'd be fun to do an updated version with some more recent books, although there are some older books here, and there's a classic novel I've thrown in, and and some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, so it's a whole mixture of books, but they all have that same quality of being unputdownable. I just had to know what happened next. So I'm going to go through each of them and describe why each of them are so special. First off, there's Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, his most recent novel. And this book is so extraordinary because, as well as being incredibly thoughtful in the way that Ishiguro writes his books, there's a real sweetness and tenderness to this story of a female robot that's created as an artificial friend, but there's this underlying feeling of menace and mystery, which makes you wonder what is really going on here. And I had to keep reading it to know what was the whole story behind this whole experience of this young artificial friend. I mean, she's not really young. She doesn't really have an age. She's a robot. But you feel very close to her and very protective of her because she has this innocence to her. But she's in this system that there's something wrong going on here. And when I got to the end, I continued to think about this book a lot more because it leaves you with a lot to consider, and so it has such a haunting quality to it, and I wanted to go back and read it again because I knew there was more to get from this story, so it's just so good. Next is my classic, which I actually only read for the first time a couple of years ago, but I can see what all the fuss is behind this novel and why it's been a big bestseller that's been in print ever since it was first published, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And this novel creates such a sense of atmosphere and suspense and mystery that I was completely gripped by the story. I was immediately in with it, and this quite like innocent seeming or naive unnamed narrator who's telling this story of marrying this mysterious wealthy man, but then when she gets to his house, she discovers that she is the second wife. His first wife mysteriously disappeared, and you wonder what happened to her and why there's this aura of her that haunts the entire house and the entire story and all of these people's lives that she encountered. And it did grip me all the way through. And though I think that the ending is slightly shaky, but that didn't detract from this overall feeling of atmosphere and suspense that this story creates. And it is just so good. Next is the award-winning The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins. And this book has so many tantalizing elements to it, as well as an overall mystery and a kind of suspense story that made me wonder what was going to happen to this central character, Franny Langton, who is writing out her story and telling her story of how she was born into slavery on a Jamaican plantation, eventually ended up in England where she became a maid to wealthy people, and now in the early 1800s she is on trial for the murder of her two employers, and the question is why? What happened behind this whole story? And there are so many bits to this of the very dark and disturbing elements about the plantation that she grew up on and what she went through, but then also getting into the seedy side of early 1800s London and the taboo of same-sex love. And so there's so much to this story, which is so compelling and just drew me all the way through, and it is so masterfully done. Next, there is a great big doorstop of a novel, but believe me, this book is entirely worth it reading it from cover to cover, and I was utterly captivated by it. It's a science fiction story, and I don't read all that much science fiction, but this really struck me. It is so thoughtful and creative, and it is called XX by Ryan Hughes, and the story is just wild. So the premise is a unnatural signal comes from outer space. It is picked up by a tech company in London, and they are able to decipher that it is not actually a signal from alien species, but a code that contains the alien species themselves. And there's a whole mystery behind this, and there are lots of different elements to the story as you follow it along. Believe me, that is not giving too much away. There's so much more to this story. You take a trip to the moon. There are secrets in the moon. There are secrets out in the universe, and there are secrets about what is happening right here on Earth. And I found it so compelling and thoughtful, and just gripped me all the way through. And as an example of why and how it gripped me all the way through is I actually read this when I was judging a book prize, and this was one of the submissions, and I had quite a few submissions to get through, and believe me, I was almost looking for an excuse to put a book aside, especially if a book was this long, and to say, no, I don't think this has award potential. But this, completely gripped me, and I couldn't put it down. I had to say, I can't put this aside. I have to read it all the way through, and it has to be considered because, it is such an incredible, compelling work. And quite a masterful achievement, and I'd really highly recommend it. From a nearly 1,000-page novel to a relatively short, just under 200 pages, novel of suspense, The Pursuit by Joyce Carol Oates. Yes, of course, there's a Joyce Carol Oates novel in here, but she can write suspense like nobody, because this is so gripping. The story of a woman named Abby, who at the very beginning of the book steps out in front of a bus, gets hit, has a concussion. But was this an accident? Did she do it on purpose? There's a whole mystery behind her past. She's only been married a day. Her husband rushes to her side, and gradually we get bits and pieces about her past. But are these true, or are these her imaginings? Are they her dreams? It's all a bit unclear, and something I love that really grips me in novels when there's this psychological tension. When it's done well, it just completely gets me, because I was wondering the whole time, is this real or is this not? And it's so enticing how Oates draws you through this story. She gets this element of psychological complexity so well. It is just excellent. Next is a novel which is also quite short. It's only 132 pages long, but he makes every word count. It's Mothering Sunday by Graham Swift, and this is the story of Jane Fairchild, who's an elderly writer recalling a particular day in 1924 of Mothering Sunday when she was a maid at a mansion, and there is Paul, who's a member of the gentry, who's just about to get married, but they have an assignation. They have an affair with each other, and it is so erotic and steamy, and there's this whole mystery and question behind what was going on in the background of this relationship and between these two people at this time. And it has, I think, that sense of nostalgia, which makes you think back on early relationships and how they become this kind of puzzle and mystery that you're trying to untangle while also recalling all of these juicy details. And it is so good. From a quite sweet, sensuous novel to a very dark and disturbing book, this is is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, and this book completely gripped me. At the center of the story is a mystery of a murder of a local individual known as the Witch, and a group of young people that discover this individual's body floating in water, and then it goes into each of their individual stories, and you get these pieces of the days surrounding this murder and what happened and all of the details of their lives, which are told in frenetic detail. It really gets into their psychology and draws you into their lives in this prose which doesn't stop. There are big blocks of text, so there's almost no punctuation in this, that it just draws you all the way through. And I know that can sound a bit alienating and difficult to read, but believe me, the way that Fernanda Melchor writes, it just grips you and doesn't let go. And yeah, this book just completely did that for me, and I was so compelled by it and wanted to know more about this story, even as I was becoming more disturbed by it. And just recently, her much shorter novel called Paradise was translated into English. It's also one of my favorite books that I read this year. Just an extraordinary writer. Cersei by Madeline Miller, and this is such a gorgeous, also quite dark story, but so compelling, about the story of a mythological figure called Cersei, that's mainly known for the odyssey of being a witch that inhabits an island and turns Odysseus's shipmates into swine. But in this, Madeline Miller reclaims her story and tells her origin story of being born as the child of a sun god and a nymph, and her very difficult childhood and sense of alienation and sense of loneliness, and her bitterness about her situation, which she carries with her, but also her determination to become very strong and powerful, and what she does with that, and how she explores her story and her psychology is just so gripping and compelling and wonderful and magical that it made me fall in love with the sense of storytelling and mythology, and it's such a wonderful reading experience. And I mean, what a gorgeous shiny cover. Another extremely compelling novel about the condition of loneliness, or at least in part, is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is the story of a young woman named Kiko that finds great comfort in the routines of a very repetitious job that she works at a convenience store, and doesn't really have any ambitions to move outside of that or to form a relationship, that she comes to see the world as these kind of structures, or this kind of factory of people coupled together and then produce children, as if they are in a factory, and has such a unique view of the world. But also there's this kind of disturbing tension, underlying tension, where she really isn't able to emotionally relate to other people, and the difficulty of that, and it explores this in such a meaningful and compelling way that I was just completely drawn into this story and wanted to know what was going to happen with her. And finally, there's the shortest book on my list, which is just under 100 pages long, Cove by Sinan Jones. And this book is so intense. It begins with a man out on who's out fishing, and he gets struck by lightning, and there is a whole struggle of trying to get to shore and the physical arduousness of that. But at the same time, memories are flashing through his mind, and you get these bits and pieces of his past, and it is so intense and compelling, following this journey of him struggling to get to shore. And there's a whole kind of magical moment when he encounters a sunfish, those really weird kind of, it must be one of the most comical sea creatures that there are, but is so wonderful. And Yeah, this book just completely gripped me, and I'd really highly recommend it. I've been wanting to read more by this author because his writing is so powerful. So those are all the books I'm going to suggest. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you agree with me. Did you have that same experience of having to read them all the way through to the end? Or are there other books that you would suggest that are just complete page turners, you just can't put them down? Let me know in the comments below if you have any books like that. But I hope you get some good suggestions from these and that you're reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.